We're going to start off with a little video that kind of sets the tone.
Cybersecurity is almost like cat and mouse between the criminals and the defenders. But the risk is asymmetric. Attackers need to find one vulnerability, one time, to achieve their goals. Cyber defenders need to defend everything all the time.
It is relatively safe to commit cybercrimes because of jurisdictional issues, and right now is a really profitable business model for criminals.
No company is too small to be a victim of a cyber attack, and we've seen that over and over in the past few years.
We see these attacks taking place at national infrastructure, and we know that if we lose electricity, if we lose water, then people who are vulnerable, people who have illnesses, they die. This is not just about causing inconvenience.
Much of cybersecurity today, as practiced, is firefighting because it has to be.
We used to think of it as castles and moats. The thought of all of my networking has to happen within the confines of the perimeter that I'm responsible for. I think that idea has shifted.
There are more and more devices connected to the internet, and it's all very convenient, but cybercriminals know how to attack those devices.
People can work from home, they can work on a business trip, they can access from different organizations, there are third parties. So the perimeter has to be understood differently. Cybersecurity is not only at the perimeter, but in every transaction.
It's not about having a team of cyber experts saving the world, because it will not work. It's about having everybody to be conscious about the risk so that they can play their role. And the responsibility of cyber leaders is to make this responsibility everyone's responsibility.
We're dealing with a multi-stakeholder problem, but we're still living in a world where there is no global governance.
Neither the public nor the private sector will be able to manage the cybersecurity war that is happening. Those that have a common enemy need to work together.
When we talk about true private and public sector cooperation, it's effectively passing the ball to the public sector in a way that the public sector can understand and use technical information.
The pressure is on for us to become more collaborative, more effective, and to move more quickly. So as the metaverse develops, as quantum computing comes online, we're ready to work with those experts who truly understand those new harms that we can't even think of.
Cyber is not a risk that you can make disappear, but it's a risk that you can manage if you become agile and proactive, and you come with the right talent and skills to face the challenge.
Specifically on the retail vertical or the restaurant vertical, but the risks are kind of the same. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look into today's security threats. We've got some experts here from all kind of different realms, from the partner side and then from the operator side, talking about how we need to merge the people, process, and technology. And as Robert introduced, we've got a great panel here. And so what I'd like to do is just get a little bit of kind of what their roles or responsibilities are within their individual organizations. So I'm going to take a seat here. And I'm going to start with you, Amit. Kind of give me a rundown of what your role is within Comcast Business, and then we'll kind of go into some questions here.
Sure. Thanks for having me here on the panel. Amit Verma, I'm the CTO for Comcast Business. I manage teams leading solution architecture, engineering, and compliance for managed services. My role also focuses on emerging technologies and solutions for secure networking for our customers. I've been with Comcast for 8 years and have been involved in restaurant industry for a long time. And as part of my team, we manage around 12 of the top 15 managed services, restaurant brands with franchise locations for our customers.
That's awesome. And then Brian Lucy, VP of IT Security at CKE.
So I've been at CKE for almost 5+ years. So I handle all the IT security and privacy for the company. We have around over 3,000 US-based restaurants, 1,000 international restaurants. So we handle everything from security operations to compliance across all those spaces. So.
And last but not least, we got Tom Seeker, CIO of Earl Enterprises.
Thank you for having me on the panel. I've been with Earl Enterprises for a year and a half, and I've been with, prior to that, 2J's for 3 years. We have 13 going on 14 different restaurant brands using multiple different panes of glass. Our tech stack looks like a shotgun hit a wall. So we have lots of ingress and egress points, and just like my buddy at CK here, and working with Comcast and also working with Fortinet, we have a very challenging and interesting environment. So we work together all the time on these type of issues.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start with a little bit of threat landscape, and then we'll go back into some questions here. As you heard on the video there, and it's very true that the attackers only have to be right one time, but we have to protect against absolutely everything. What we're seeing here is it really is a perforated threat landscape. There's more than ever before. 10 years ago, you had one ingress, one egress, and that was it. That's all you had to worry about. Now we have IoT, OT, anything else that's connected inside the environment, because we want to make sure that we're connecting to the customers. Restaurants need to reach the customers to meet consumer demand. So that means we're putting more technology out there, which is, again, it's boosting the bottom line, it's creating more touch points, but it's also creating vulnerabilities that the attackers want to exploit. So what we see, as this comes back online in a second, is there's a lot of them out there. Of the 55+ million endpoint vulnerabilities that we found out there, 80% of those, 80% of the 55 million came from North America. That's not all retail, but it just shows, it paints a picture of there's a lot out there. There's more apps, they're more quickly deployed, there's less rigorous security controls around IoT and things out there. There's not a lot of standardization, which a lot of the organizations here are working towards that standardization, but it's not there yet. So what we see is there's a lot of unpatched vulnerabilities, and everybody likes to scream at the rooftops of the new highest level 10 CVE that's out there, yet there's more than likely a couple of unpatched vulnerabilities in any one of these organizations that they've had for 5 or 10 years. So everybody likes to look at the top one, the biggest one, but a lot of times it's just the patch management's hard, and it takes years and years to do. What we've seen in ransomware, and this is specifically on retail and hospitality, is there's been over 1,800 different ransomware campaigns variants that we've seen out there, and that's continued to grow and grow and grow. A couple years ago, we saw a 1,000% increase. We didn't see that 1,000% increase this last go around, but we did see more variants. So they're trying new tactics, they're trying new things. It's almost like whack-a-mole. We see these groups out there like Darkside, Lazarus, Carbonac, not the next Marvel bad guy or DC bad guy, the Darkside case, but these really are the names that they use. I think what we've really seen is not just the ransomware going to the more destructive side, the more level 3 exploit attempts, meaning they're not just taking your data, they're not just encrypting it, selling it out there, they're also using your environments, your networks, to get into other networks, to partners' networks, to customers' networks. And then they tell them it was you that they got in. So now it's long-term brand reputational harm that we're seeing. We're also seeing wiper malware. So this is the destructive, just kind of want to burn the world down type of attacks that we see out there. And we saw a 55% increase year over year in wiper attacks. They stem from geopolitical conflict, the war in Ukraine, a lot of them were out there, but those never stay inside of those national boundaries. Now 55% seems like a lot, but there was really only 5 different variants of wipers out there. So it's to 13 or 14 or 15 now. But we're going to see that continue to climb up as we go along. I think the biggest thing that we see, though, is these attackers are learning more about the environments before they ever start the attack. They're not launching campaigns until they know exactly what vulnerabilities are going to be easiest for them to exploit and gain them the most money that's out there. So what I want to play here is a game called the Red Zone, the Cyber Red Zone. Anybody here, show of hands, or just shout it out here. Who do you think in the NFL last year had the highest red zone offense percentage? Most touchdowns scored in the red zone. Anybody? What was that? It was close. No. It was actually the Dallas Cowboys, and how well did that work out for them? Not very. Second was the Kansas City Chiefs. Go Chiefs, right? But what we talk about in the red zone here is not that. What the red zone here is the total number of vulnerabilities that are out there. It's around 200,000 vulnerabilities. No security team can watch out for 200,000 vulnerabilities. That's drinking from a fire hose. What we see, a subset of that is the open attack surface. So for an organization, this is the number of vulnerabilities that could have an impact on their environment. What the red zone is, play the prevent defense there. What the red zone is the 1 to 5% of those that are actually being actively exploited. So the 200,000 down to the maybe couple hundred that are actually existing within an organization that you should maybe watch out for. But the red zone is the ones that are actively being exploited now. There may be high critical vulnerabilities that have been out there for years, but there's no known exploit, no known attacks, no known attempts to use them. But there are some that are maybe a medium vulnerability that's actively being exploited, And that should be higher on your list. But CISOs and security practitioners don't know where to focus because there's the 200,000 that they're constantly being inundated with. That's what we talk about with the cyber red zone. We already have that. So what we're going to talk about here is some practical insights from our panelists. So I'm going to start with you, Amit. We're going to talk about people, process, technology. It really takes all three. Yeah. So if one's not working, you see it on the other side. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you make sure that people, process, and technology are all aligned, and maybe how that changes in the event of a breach?
So for a security breach, to control it, you need to have a good playbook. And there are a few pieces in that playbook. You need to have preparedness. You need to have detection and analysis. You need to have containment, then remediation and recovery. And the last piece is learnings and post-incident adjustment. All these pieces, if you look at them, people, process, and technology play a key role in it. If you think about it, if you know, 82% of security breaches have a human element. It's either social engineering attacks or user error or just misuse. So that makes people very critical to this. So having good training for your employees, having good security hygiene, and training them on not to open phishing emails, not to open attachments. So that's the critical piece and the people piece. And then the other is all your employees need to understand their roles and responsibilities when an attack happens, right? So a good playbook is only as good as the people who are executing it. So that's where the people piece. Now let's talk about the technology. Technology helps with preparedness and also with the detection and analysis. So if you look at the technology stack in any environment, you start with the next-gen firewall, so you need to have good prevention. Then on top of that, you need to have antivirus and EDR solutions for your critical systems and for your all-employee systems so that they don't click on any malware or any other bad things. Then you need to have managed SIEM or MDR solutions so that you can detect those breaches or vulnerabilities if it happens. You need also to have sandboxing solutions so that you can send those vulnerable pieces to a controlled environment to understand the way the hackers are exploiting the systems so you can remediate against them. So those are some of the things you need to have as part of a technology stack. And a lot of times, companies don't have all the resources or don't have the expertise, and that's where, again, people come back in, right? You need to have partners who can bring in expertise to help with these solutions. Now let's talk about the process, right? You have your people, you have the technology, but if you don't have the process in place, a lot of times that's where an attack happens, people don't know what to do, and the time it takes to remediate increases, and the amount of data that exfiltrates or the damage the hackers can do also increases. So you need to have a good playbook, and you need to test it out frequently with tabletop exercises so that everyone understands their role when a breach happens. And then as part of that process, you need to have a good way to remediate or control the risk, have people assigned to make firewall changes, take the systems which have been infected offline, and then also have a good immutable backup solution. Those are the right ones, read multiple times solutions, because what happens in case of a breach, a lot of times the hackers also go and exploit the data backup and make changes to it. Now you don't have a good backup to recover the systems. That's why immutable backup is critical to any good playbook for security breach.
Yeah, and I think, there's the analogies, no good plans to rise contact with the enemy. I like the Mike Tyson, right? You're good until you're tough until you get punched in the mouth, and that's what you do after that. I think it's interesting, people, process, technology, they all kind of have to work together in tandem. Really, no piece is more important than the other. I would say the human element is obviously pretty important, and Tom, we'll touch on that with you here in a second. But from those insights here, Brian, talking about all of the pieces of technology, the processes, all of this stuff that it takes, what about in the case of expanding businesses and bringing on more business functions, bringing on new technology, or in the case of mergers and acquisitions, you even inherit risk. You're taking in things that you didn't know about. So how would you say that adds complexity, both the hyper expansion of technology, but also M&A activities where you're inheriting risk? How do you combat against that, and how does that add complexity in the incident and breach scenarios?
So I look at it from a franchisee perspective, really. When we take over restaurants or we'll bring on franchisees occasionally, usually it's a really fast turnaround. And so it's hard sometimes to do the proper due diligence. So I think when you do M&A or bringing in franchisees, what have you, that due diligence is extremely important to understand what you're getting yourself into, right? For our franchise base, I might change the question up just a little bit of kind of what we've tried to do, because with us, we have so many corporate restaurants, but we have a ton of franchisees, which I said, they're on, if we have a breach, you're on your own. I was joking with them over there because you guys are franchisees over here. But what we try to do is when we look at our restaurants, we try to figure out like what can happen, right? Mm-hmm. So really within a retail organization, we're looking at credit card risk, we're looking at ransomware that you just showed up there, wipers, all those kinds of things. So what can we do for our franchisees to provide them some help? So what we've tried to do is put in some certain, really basic type things. One, credit cards, point-to-point encryption, ensuring that credit cards don't exist in our environment anymore. Mm-hmm. The second is like within ransomware. We can put EDR in our corporate restaurants and our supported restaurants. We do have Sentinel-1, a lot of EDR programs. But what we've tried to do is really look at it from a network perspective as well. So forcing segmentation, because everybody's got a network, everybody's got switches. So how can we segment the network to reduce risk within our restaurants and keep things moving? Mm-hmm. So those are the things that we've tried to do just to provide value back to the franchisees. And then I had one last night ask me to can you please provide additional support with AV and EDR and different things. So that's something that we're going to be trying to do, provide them more support on that side. But when you go back to your original question, it's just the due diligence around everything. Also, when you're selling or buying a business, ensuring that those warranties and different things are within your contracts, because if something does happen, do they have proper cyber liability insurance to protect you? So there's a few things that you can do to kind of offset that.
It's always been layered defense in depth. I think we're getting to more of a risk-based approach where it's not the same level of security everywhere. You're really identifying the juicy center, right? And providing different security controls around that. And there's ways to do forward assessments of when you're bringing on a new business to assess what their security posture is before. I've seen prevalence now of white teams going in, clean teams, and just say, ooh, there's these security concerns we may need to take care of before we start this activity. Exactly. So those types of more due diligence, the due care, the follow through are happening, but it still goes back to that kind of human element. And Tom, I want to kind of ask you, how does that further complicate things? As Amit said, it's 82% has a human element in there, whether it's negligence, misconfiguration, social engineering, or malicious intent. It's there. So how do you combat internal vulnerabilities inside the business?
Well, you nailed it. Our number one problem with cybersecurity is people. Quite frankly, if we didn't have people, we would never have any problems, right? We wouldn't have business. Yeah, it's a computer's if-then statement. It doesn't know to do anything unless a human tells it to do it, right? So our number one risk is people. When we're dealing with cybersecurity, we're dealing with our employees, we're dealing with customers, doing customer data, credit cards, everything we do. It's all about training. We got to, you can tell people don't click on that. They're going to click on it. Mm-hmm. You can tell people don't click on it twice. They're going to click on it twice. So the EDR tools that are there, when they click on it, that lets us know, then we can go in and tell them, well, you shouldn't have clicked on that, and here's why, and this is what it started to do. The sandbox that you talked about earlier. Well, they clicked on it, now I don't know what was potentially hit, what was harmed. How do I go back and track it? Do we have logging? Do we have tools in place that gives us visibility? Do we have monitoring in place that, while like you talked about, hundreds of thousands of different entry points and different attack vectors from bad people coming at us at all times, how do we know where to focus our attention? So your MDR tool, you got somebody watching saying, hey, something just feels wrong. You've got too many things coming at you from that direction. And then you turn out that a bad actor ended up getting into somebody's computer. And you'd think that just clicking a link would be, well, anybody can get away with that, right? Well, now they're getting so unsophisticated. They're actually, they backed it off so much that you don't even suspect in some cases, where it says click here, then it brings you to a website. Then you have to type in a code that they gave you, so you feel that you're doing something cyber secure because they gave you a code, and you just installed the software.
Yeah.
So it's not like somebody is at your window smashing it and climbing in. It's literally, it's the bad actor going, can I come in? You say no. Seriously, can I come in? No. Please? No. Come on. Okay. That's what's happening with our own employees. So quite frankly, at every restaurant group, at every company I've ever worked at, my #1 threat vector is my own employees.
Yeah.
Because they, quite frankly, no matter how much you train them, are in a hurry. They're trying to get things done. They're trying to be productive. We have to find that balance to where we can protect the company, protect the network, protect our customers, protect personal identifiable information, right? Because that's what all this is about.
It's about data. It's about that's where the money is.
Right, because if they don't get something, then all that effort was wasted, right? So all that time, they're trying to get the credit card information, but now with EMB, that's almost impossible. So instead of getting that, then they're going to go back and get information and extort me, because they can then tell somebody that I don't have good control, so they shouldn't do business with me. So they're going to ruin my reputation. So that's where we become, viable. That's where you become viable, is that we all have to understand that the training is important, but enforcement of the training. And I'll be honest with you, some of the hardest people to work with are the people that have president and officer in their title.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're the ones that don't want multi-factor. They're the ones that will not change their passwords. They're the ones that will change their passwords and change it back to what they were just when the time before they had it.
It's 1, 2, 3 pounds now instead of
yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And then 1, 2, 3 pound exclamation, then 1, 2, 3 exclamation pound. Yeah.
And that's in the best practices we're going to talk about. And there's actually a scenario I'm going to pose to you guys before we kind of go into Q&A that talks a little bit about that. So what we're going to go into here is, what are some of these seem like basics, right? But you'd be so surprised at just following the basics, how that helps. Put one layer of defense in, right? And they see that you have that layer of defense, like a sandbox, like a deception technology, something else. They move on, statistically proven that it's out there. But also, how many people have a flat network, don't have any type of zero trust, aren't doing any segmentation. There's a lot of organizations that still do that. So what are some 10 basics? Seems basic, but it's nice to take these down and follow them, have the due diligence and follow through. Identify the scope of the attack. How far did it go? It's really not about the who. We go back, as threat research organizations say, we know the most active attackers out there, but does that really matter? It's the techniques that they use, how successful they are, and how far they went before you realized it. So identify the scope of the attack. Isolate and contain it. You know what? We've still seen pulling the plug still works sometimes to isolate. That if you have to go to that level, but now we see application level, full network level, full agent level, device level segmentation working, where you don't have to blow up the entire network to fix the problem, because then the collateral damage may be worse than what you actually were trying to fix. Notify your internal stakeholders, internal communication. That human element is absolutely critical. Inform your external parties. We see third-party risk becoming so critically important here, but the third-party communication is difficult. There's not a lot of racy charts of if an incident or event happens here, who do I contact first? Who are they doing business with? What's their communication model? I think that needs to be fleshed out a little bit of our external communication plans with supply chain risk becoming so prevalent. Can't really see it here, but engage your third party. Down there, yeah, I can't really even see that down there. So investigate the cause. So then you get to, we've identified it, we've contained it, then it's well, what actually happened? Because stopping the bleeding is critical. Doing the network-based, the risk-based isolation is critical. Then we understand, well, how did this happen? What control wasn't in place? Or what control was in place but wasn't implemented effectively that we didn't follow through on? Go back and review your security controls. Was it something that we did right, but just did it wrong this time? Did we do everything right and they just found a way around it because they performed such good recon that they knew another vulnerability? All that is now an opportunity to say, I didn't even know that vulnerability existed. We do need to fix that. We're living in a world where breaches is the order of the day. Incidents do happen. It's how we respond to them and lead into and out of a breach that's actually more important. Implement the corrective measures. All of these things happen first before you implement what you think are the corrective measures. Somebody talked about backups. I've seen a lot of people back up what was already wrong. And now they continue to back it up and proliferate that through the organization because they never actually fixed the real problem that was out there. And now you've continued to expand that throughout the organization. Continued communication, it doesn't end the first 2 weeks. You know, there's a lot of third parties that we all do business with right now where we see, well, this event happened, we're gonna tell you what happened, but then the communication kind of trails off. You need that continued communication 6 months, a year down the road until it's actually fixed and everybody is made whole. I think that's extremely important. And then we learn and adapt. The threat actors are out there are learning and adapting to our security controls that are out there. We like to throw out the buzzwords of AI and machine learning. We use that as combative measures internally, but they're using it as well. Things like ChatGPT or chatbots or AI in general. What they're using from those is to just learn more information, take disparate sources of information about organizations and make it so they can target attacks more effectively, and they're not having to lift a finger. AI, machines are doing it for them, so they learn about all of the vulnerabilities. Who are they doing business with? Who can I attack and maybe get in from a back door into this organization? It's creating an easier, a la carte type services, crimeware as a service, becoming much more easy for them to launch these type of attack campaigns. So that's kind of a top 10 here of just basics of what we would see of going through the order of before, during, and after a breach. What should you do? Now, before we go into the kind of what you learn more, I want to pose a scenario to our panelists here. I love the CISO series podcast. Anybody listen to that? It's a pretty good podcast that's out there, pretty informative. And they pose these what if terrible scenarios. Neither are good, but you have to pick which one would you favor more. It's always good when you don't agree with each other, but it's okay to agree with each other. So the scenario is 50% of your employees are phished. They fall for it every time, the 1 or 2 times. But you have the tools and you get a budget to try to correct against that. You're given that because you see the 50% success rate. Or you have one or a couple high C-levels that continuously fall for it every time, but you're not given the budget or tools to fix the problem. Which is the worst scenario? I'll start with you, Amit. 50% of your organization has been falling for it, but you have the tools and budget to go try to fix it. Or your C-levels keep falling for it, but you're not going to get any budget and you're not going to get any more tools. Neither of them are good. I realize that.
Remove access for the C-level from every critical.
What he said.
Yeah. That was the answer that they give, and they gave it because they're not even going to notice that they don't have the access anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. That brings me to the point, zero trust network access, right? We need to go for micro-segmentation and zero trust so that people who need access get access only at that time.
And protect them from themselves. So Brian, would you agree with that?
I agree. Yeah, I would. But in that case, I'd almost go with the 50%.
Because you got money and
because if you look at like C-levels are going to be your most attacked vector in some cases, right? So if I had all the tools and resources that I could do, and I could do anything I wanted to try to adjust that, I would probably do that. I mean, we've seen really good success over the time I've been at CKA by phishing exercises and training and forcing them into training. Mm-hmm. Another thing that I did outside when I wasn't in retail, in a different life, was we actually, in our phishing exercises, and I need to do it at CKA, is to go off and put departments against one another.
Nice.
So within like your operations group, your marketing group, and all that, go back and say, hey, you had 30%, you had 20%, you had thing, and then go off and publish that out so they know that.
Gamification.
Yeah, gamification related to the phishing exercises.
Yeah.
And that really, really does help a lot.
Yeah, making sure that they know that they're part of the process and part of the solution. They're the human firewall. Tom, do you agree with them or you disagree? Kind of hybrid?
I would rather have the money.
Yeah.
All day long.
Yeah.
Because C-levels, I can put them in a gateway and stick them out in the middle of nowhere and not give them access to routine piles because they're not normally hitting those. Mm-hmm. Where I'm most worried about is those 50% of the employees have access to a ton of data. Mm-hmm. And what they wrote in Excel spreadsheets and what they put in text files are things that can put me in a lot of hot water. Mm-hmm. C-levels are being attacked all the time, but the reality is I can go to the C-levels and control their environment. I can put a lot of things into place and I can minimize what they don't normally.
Only if you already had the tools. You don't get any more money, you don't get any more tools.
But you give me money, I got tools, right? Because that's
for the 50%, not the C-level.
Yeah, the 50% is what I'm going for.
Okay.
Because I'd rather have the tools. I can do the training. I can work hard and control. Because you also got to look at the law of averages, right? If I have 15,000 employees and I've got 20 C-levels, I got 15,000 ingress points versus 20.
Right.
Right. So I can protect against substantially more. I can accidentally maybe educate those that won't pay attention, because what we're doing with everybody else, they're going to want to do that too. If they see that everybody else is using multi-factor, they see that everybody else is, doing the training and learning, by proxy, they will start to do it. But if I just go for the C-level and I just work with them, but I don't have a budget and I'm not able to train, then I can promise you that 50% is going to go up substantially more, and I'm not going to be able to control it. It's economy of scale.
Any other scenarios or questions out here? We'll kind of wrap this up here and to learn more, tell you a little bit about the tools that the RTN has made just for this area. But any other questions out there from the audience for any of our panelists here about the before, during, after breach, general insecurity, really anything? We answered every question. It's always great, right, when you answer them all before it's even done. Okay, well, yes.
I heard about doing backups.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What's a good number to look at?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's interesting, and I'll let you guys answer as well, but there depends if you're talking about letter of law or cyber maturity, because letter of law is what regulations are being stipulated on you, because they'll dictate how long you have to keep backups or logs or things like that. I think it's the length is good. I mean, you want to go back as far enough that that you don't have the threat inside of your environment, because they can lay dormant for a while. But you also don't want to go back too far that, was this data even valuable to anymore? Am I restoring to something that I can still do business? I think the more of is, where are you storing it? You store it on the same, if you're doing network storage, you're storing it in the same place as everything else, it's not very valuable. It's more offsite storage, more abstracting that storage or the backups away from the rest of your environment. That's probably more important, so that you know they're clean. Whether they're valuable or not, whether it's still going to allow you to do as much business as you were before, maybe not. Maybe you'll get 80% of the efficacy from it. But at least you know that they're clean because they're stored somewhere else. It's the shadow copies or volume copies that you left on your network. They're going to get to them. They're going to find them. And you're exactly right. They're actually going to find them before they even let you know that they're attacking your environment, because they want to know where every little piece is before they start that attack, so that they're more successful. You guys have any on that? Offsite. Don't keep it on your environment. Right. It has to be valuable. The length of time is not necessarily as important as the where you store them inside of the environment. So we do, yes?
Recently, LastPass had an incident. How would you respond to companies that are relying on third parties like LastPass, the master password, everybody put their trust in that? What steps would you take or recommend for companies who now hit
Tom, are you chomping at the bit on this one?
Actually, I can talk on that one exactly, because LastPass is a product that I've used numerous times over the years. The reality is you put your trust in a company, and that trust gets violated, then you have to react. If for instance, LastPass was hit, and then they were hit again, so they were hit initially, they said that they didn't get access to the hashes, then they come back and found out that where they stored the hashes, they got those later. So now all that information's there. That's either your personal or business. I know a ton of businesses, and I've gotten numerous phone calls as recently as yesterday about this exact piece. So what we did is we went back and restored a backup that we had a year ago, looked at every password at every location that we had, and immediately forced a password change at every one of them. So you cannot stop what's already happened, but you can stop it from happening again. So it's just like you talked about. You identify a risk, you mitigate the risk immediately. So with LastPass, you go in, you identify every site, every location, and you change it immediately. And then you don't go back to where, and I'm not saying LastPass, I'm not going to get sued by them. But I'm not saying that you should just not go to something that has lost trust.
Right.
So there's a lot of other companies out there. I like I like using multiple different methods and levels of redundancies, like what Dwight asked about backups. That applies here as well. I don't keep anything and everything at the same place no matter what I do. I have backups that are cold storage, archive, that I don't touch. If it's a year old, I stick it, storage is cheap. The same thing with passwords. I only keep things in my password keeper on something that's relevant. Everything else gets retired, because like you talked about earlier, we're hitting systems, computer systems, that are new. We're vetting new stuff.
Yeah.
More dangerous is the thing that's been sitting there for 5 years.
And you forget about it.
And it's a time bomb. It's
Yeah.
running Windows 7, it's in a closet.
Orphan databases in the cloud. Yeah, absolutely.
There's your danger. So with LastPass, what I would tell anybody is with any password, any tool, go in and look at Windows and go into, if you've got Chrome, and look at where it says your password's been compromised. If it has, don't freak out, go change it. I mean, the biggest thing is if they have it, then it's going to get floated around. It's going to get up on the dark web. You're going to go up to Royal Ransomware, and it's going to be up on their main page.
And I would say use the tools, the external attack surface monitoring tools and things like that to augment it, to let you know ahead of time and tell you if they're in the red zone. Just because they're out there, yes, you should change them if you know about them, but use those tools to say, hey, these are being actively exploited. These are being used in these attack campaigns. So implement tools like a brand reputation protection, like an external attack surface monitoring, like a persona protection for your executives to say, hey, this person's information's out there, their password's out there, it's being used for these campaigns. Those tools do exist. So it's some of those best practices we talk about here in the RTN cybersecurity best practices for restaurants, the POS security implementation best practices, which we created over the last year or so. It's a labor of love because there's going to be a lot that goes into it because the environment's changed. And so these will have to be updated. But these are resources out there for RTN members to use. They've been created by the community for the community. So I would highly encourage using these assets. Is there any more questions that we have? Yes?
One, will this slide deck be available to participants?
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Okay. I just want to know it's not.
Yep. Yeah, I'm sure we can. We got the scans of who came in here. So if you, I guess we can just send out a link to it. Send out a link. Hey, enjoyed the session, and we can get you that. I'm going to commit to that. I don't know if it can be done. I'm sure it can. So Robert and the team can figure that out.
What was the question?
Oh, the slide.
When selecting training for
Uh-huh.
cybersecurity, are you using your internal training teams or a third party? And how do you, after selecting that, force that upon end users without it seeming patronizing and/or insulting?
I'm going to have to recuse myself from that because we provide it, right? We're a training organization. So, I mean, we use our own, but we push that out there for others to use as well. And, like we make ours free. So I think we shouldn't compete on the knowledge that's out there. That the training and awareness information should be free. How you use it may be a little different. But, I don't know how you guys work in your selection process of who you use and vet from information awareness training, information security awareness training.
Yeah. I'll take it. Well, yeah, I mean, we just switched actually our awareness training this year.
I think it's important actually to kind of get the most knowledge out there.
And I think, we were, for the past, 4 years, we were using a certain vendor, and I just didn't feel like the content was up to par. Now, education vendors allow you to push out training, push out like little 15-second clips and all these other things. So we moved to a different vendor, but we kind of have a mix within our restaurants. Our restaurants are kind of unique, so we have credit card security training related for PCI that we used our internal teams to actually create, that we put out on our standard CBT education system. But security, we kind of have our own system. We do an annual training that we put out on what we call, our learning system, and then we do kind of individual training sessions if you clicked a link or what have you with regard to phishing. So.
Yeah. I think it's important to kind of, one, make sure that the information security training is meeting your needs, but also to make it more easily consumable. We used to have, here's all your training right here, here's an hour, sit down in front of it and read it. No, nobody does it. We're a phone-based, convenience-based culture. Everybody wants to have snippets, tidbits. Let me get 30 seconds, a minute, a couple minutes, get this information in here, and then go on to the next type of lesson.
Use your other tools. Use wall boards. Like, wall boards are cheap. Everybody has them now. Put a slide up now and then, change it up now and then. Just by inference, they'll read it, not pay attention to it, but they'll remember it.
Yeah.
And they'll see it. So just every opportunity you have, just constantly be training. If you walk around and see somebody went to lunch and they didn't lock their computer, remind them.
Constantly is the big thing. I think that's important. It's not a, well, we got to do this once a year. It's a kind of a all the time thing.
The big thing I saw was the patronizing question. He's absolutely right. Is because one of the things that's really important is that when we're talking to our teammates is that we're remembering that they're coworkers and that we're not coming at them as being smarter than them. What we're trying to do is help them and help the company avoid something that could cause massive problems. So I think having an understanding that not everybody's a subject matter expert in IT is important, but I think it's also very, very important that we all work with our whole team to understand that IT isn't the redheaded stepchild anymore. We're actually the critical component to pretty much every department.
Right.
So we work together now. Now it's not so much as us going at them saying you can't do, it's here's a different way of doing it. Here's a better way of doing it. Here's how you can go where you're trying to go versus no, you cannot stop.
Yeah, I think security's role is not to say no anymore. It's to allow organizations to say yes more, but more responsibly.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I always say security is everybody's responsibility. That's my tagline. I say it every one of these. So.
And it can't be just an annual security training, right?
No.
It has to be continuous. You should be doing phishing campaigns internally to test out employees and make sure they're not clicking, and if they do, at least send them back into a training.
Yeah, I mean, just don't do it for compliance sake, right?
Yeah.
The annual training's always been for compliance sake, for PCI, for all these other things. So that's kind of at the wayside now. We got to move forward with different things. I would say though, on a little bit different topic around just security tools in general, the one thing I try to do every year is go out and see what's available, right? Even if I have a 3-year contract on a security tool, make sure that I understand everything out there because the world's changing. Security is changing very rapidly. So that's one thing I would also state.
Okay.
Also, this right here. This is what's critical because we get together as CIOs, CTOs, presidents, everybody that talk within our group. This is what the most important thing is because I can call Phil up. I can call up, talk to these guys, say, hey, this is a rabbit hole I just fell down. How can I get out of it? You know, how can I help? We can all help each other out. We may be competing in some ways, whereas we're trying to determine who has a better burger, who has better fries, who has better this.
Them's fighting words, but competing for security shouldn't be.
We're all helping each other out. Nobody wants to.
And that's why MURTEC is so great. That's why hospitality technology, putting these things on is so great. The RTN for putting out the standards out there is amazing. And I want to thank our panelists here for providing the insight and everybody else for being here, asking questions, absorbing this. Robert he promised, right, to get this out there as best as he can. So if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'll be here at the conference all week. So thank you guys for joining the session today.